Welcome to NDTR Spotlight, the corner of the internet where NDTR shine. I'm your host, Marie Lorraine. A lot of times on this podcast, we have future, former, and current NDTRs that we spotlight. And a lot of DTRs I've had so far have used this credential as a stepping stone. However, there is another way to use the credential as a fulfilling career. And it's so rewarding and so exciting when we have NDTRs on the podcast who have found and have been able to manage and have a fulfilling career as an NDTR. Our guest today, Kathy, when I have people come on the show, I have them kind of fill out a pre-format just so I can get to know them a little bit. And even before sitting down and chatting with her, she made a strong point to say, I am a strong advocate for NDTRs/DTR's credential being more than just a stepping stone to becoming an RD. Becoming an NDTR/DTR can be a fulfilling and lifetime career choice. And hearing that from her was so encouraging because she is a living example of that. She's not just saying it. She has worked in long-term care, food service management, patient education, staff education, end of life, food safety, and administration of USDA child nutrition programs. She has done it all. And on top of that, she has an associate's degree from a SUNY school in, it's a pretty long title of the degree. It is Food Service and Hospitality Administration major diet technology. So she was able to have a fulfilling career just with an associate's degree. And I'd say just to emphasize the point that you don't have to boggle yourself down with 4 years of school and all of these things. You can find a way. The NDTR credential can be enough. And she is an example of that. So without further ado, let's meet this infamous Kathy and hear her story, hear how she has been able to do so much in the career. And we're going to learn a lot about the current job she's doing, which will blow your mind. Kathy, it's so good to have you.
It's good to be here, Marie.
Yes, thank you for being here. And so with every interview, I'd like to start off with, how did you find out about the NDTR credential?
Well, I stumbled upon it, honestly. I had been in 2 years of school. I thought that I was going to be some kind of pure scientist. I had a lot of biology under my belt. I had gone through 2 years of school already, and I just felt that my personality was not built to be just a pure scientist. And I kept thinking, what can I do where I can combine everything that I like? I really am good at math and science in school, but I like people and I like to cook and I like a lot of different things. What can I do? In the college that was in my very own community happened to be that little pot of gold I was looking for. They had a culinary degree, but alongside the culinary and the hospitality degree was this magical thing called a major in dietetic technology. So I looked at that and I looked further into it and I thought, oh, gee, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because this 2-year program seemed to be a more technical program. I didn't fully understand it at that point because I was just researching it, but I kept thinking, this is great, because within 2 years, thinking about, I had already been out in the world already and I was a little bit older. How can I get up and running and get working to start to keep on providing a living for myself? Because now I'm into my mid-20s. And I need something where I can quickly get up and running. And then my plans at that point were fully to go on and become an RD, not knowing how long and treacherous that whole path would be. And that, adulting takes over and life takes over. And you can never really go back to that if you have not fit. It's so difficult, I should say, to complete that track if you've already come into life and you're doing all the adulting things of having a relationship and being married. How do you go back and back up to do what everybody else did when they first came out of school? It's very difficult.
It is, yes. And it takes away your life from living, to having to do school all the time and dive into that. So you found the associate's degree. How was that program for you?
That program, when I first started out, I thought it was wonderful. But then as time went on, I became to really know how great this program was, just because of how all of the classes were very intense and all packed into those 2 years. But in between all those classes were all of our supervised studies and all of our supervised hours that we put in. And the professors that we had were such wonderful women that had been out in the field, and they had a lot of experience under their belts, and they were so willing to share all of that with us. And then they had their connections out in the community. The connections, I live in a rural section outside of the capital of Albany, New York, but their reach grabbed out around our rural area and headed out towards Cooperstown. If anybody knows anything about the Baseball Hall of Fame, that's towards Cooperstown area. And then it reached all the way out towards the capital, towards Albany. So I was able to take in all these different experiences, from community nutrition, working in hospitals, working in nursing homes, working at a senior Meals on Wheels, working at small little schools around the area in the kitchens. And then I also worked right within the college food service. So I just couldn't even imagine how wonderful this program was and how much it showed me, but then it also showed me how much further I would have to go to become an RD at that point. I was like, oh no, I have to get some more school to finish off my bachelor's degree. Then I have to go for another whole year of internship without getting paid. Oh my goodness, how can I do that?
Yes, and that's where a lot of people are. They do the associate's degree and then they want to continue with the bachelor's and eventually find that RD, but you did not. So where in your career did you say, no, this was enough, the DTR credential?
Well, honestly, I think that when I first came out of my program, one of my preceptors, who was also a part-time professor, became my first boss. She already knew what I could do because I worked at her facility. Literally, I worked one of the units of her facility while she had a staff member out. My supervised hours were in her facility, and I pretty much worked on a unit in a nursing home. And I helped her fill in her position while she had a dietech out on maternity leave. And then when my hours were over and it was the end of my last semester and I was ready to graduate, we found out that that dietech wasn't coming back. So I ever so easily interviewed for that position and took that job right over. And when I got in, I said, wow, this is pretty great. And for a while, I forgot about becoming an RD because everything just felt so comfortable and it worked. And the salary wasn't too bad. But then as life went on and a handful of years went by, I thought, I don't know, now I have a lot more experience under my belt and maybe I should, you hate to feel greedy, but you hate to undersell yourself also. And I'm like, but I think I could get a better salary than this. So I looked around, I got a better salary, but those were the days where it was the 1990s and salaries for diet techs in New York were kind of going up. There were a lot of jobs out there. So I didn't think about it yet. Once again, I put it off. I kept putting off this thought about becoming an RD. Somewhere in the mid 1990s, that is where all of a sudden budgets started crunching in states and in the government. And they started thinking, oh, too many hospital beds and too many nursing home beds. So New York State had something called the Berger Commission, and they studied. They ended up closing a lot of different nursing homes in the area, and they cut down beds. So now all of a sudden your pool of jobs started shrinking up. And it became just a little more difficult. And then sometimes some of the nursing homes were bringing food service companies to come in and run their facility food service departments. And when the food service companies came in, they weren't always so fond of having the dietetics. They'd come along and they would have their own RDs on staff and they would bring them in. So now, little by little here and there, I started almost job hopping because they would give me like a 30-day notice and say, okay, you know, we wish we could keep you, but whatever. Either I've been in places that downsized beds so I wouldn't have a job and I was lower, you know, seniority, or I was also in places where the food service company would come in and they would much rather prefer to have an RD. So that's where it came back to nip me in the bud in the mid 1990s. So now I had been out of school since 1988. Now I'm somewhere getting up further into the 1990s. and I'm way into my adulthood. And I said, oh my goodness, did I make a really big mistake? And I started really kicking myself for the fact that I did not go back to school and get my RD. And I thought I made a really big mistake.
That sounds like it. That's very heavy to have to. I
Yeah.
know I had a similar story where I wanted more money. So I like decided to go to the RD route and just having that fear. So how did you overcome that? What came next?
What came next was I had to honestly do a lot of research on my own. I feel like the dietech programs, and I think a lot of dietech, a lot of just in general, nutrition programs and dietetic programs don't always give us a bigger range of things that we can do with our credentials and with our experiences and everything that we have in our tool belt when we come out of our programs. I feel like some of the only things that were tossed out at me is, okay, this is really a stepping stone for you. And other than that, while you're, biding your time, while you're stepping up to become an RD and getting what you need to become an RD, you can work at a hospital or you can work at a nursing home. And that's pretty much the ideas that they give you.
That's so limiting. It's crazy that those are the ideas that you're given in an associate's program too, because I would expect them to be more. I did a bachelor, so I'm not familiar with that. I expect them to be more like, this is good. Like you can go far with this.
And I mean, it's weird because they gave us more experiences than that out in the field, but then they almost led you to believe that to do some of those other positions, you had to be an RD.
Oh, interesting.
So I just feel like in a lot of ways, especially in those earlier days, because I think the dietetic technician credential only came around 1986-ish.
Yes,
Don't
I
quote
think
me.
so. Yeah.
And I graduated, and I'm going to age myself here. I graduated from my 2-year program in 1988. So everything was fairly new. So I don't really think they knew what to do with us. Let's put it that way.
That makes sense. Okay, understood. Yes.
So a lot of things in the mid 1990s, I started doing a lot of things just to try to do anything to better myself, but I knew I didn't have a lot of money to do it. And once again, I'm in my 30s, heading for my 40s. I'm like, what am I going to do money wise? Do I really want to take student loans out? I could have, but it wasn't like the most fond idea I could think of at that point. So I did a little stint of going to a food service management company and becoming a food service director in long-term care. And that definitely was not my cup of tea. I was like, no, 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 cut it right there.
Wait, okay. How did you get into that though? That's a whole sect of dietetics that we don't really talk about.
Because when I was in not only my practicum hours, but also while I was working in nursing homes, I was game for anything. And I always tell dietetics, always volunteer to do things no one else would do at your job, or even just a volunteer experience. So if a food service director needed help doing a project that was more on the management side, if I had time to do it, I would pitch in and try to do as much of it as I could. I also had a dietitian who one time said to me, oh, I have a little bit of a caseload at an assisted living. And at assisted livings, there are different rules where dietetics can go in and just do like normal nutrition consultations. They can go in and inspect their kitchens. Now, I didn't know what they were looking for, but I went in and I learned what they were looking for, and I consulted because a dietitian led me down that road. Anything that someone gives you can say is take it in and drink it in. All the experiences I had in my practicum, I drank that in. I volunteered at different places doing little presentations, which I had never done in my life. I'd speak one-on-one to a patient, but I would never speak to a group or do anything like that. I thought that I was not set for that type of a situation, but I volunteered and made myself do situations that most of the other dietetics I knew would never take on. So I think all along, I just started prepping myself for where I eventually went. And then besides that, just looking out in the field when clinical dietetics started drying up, when my food service director stint didn't work well, I still kept trudging on, and I would work whatever day job I had, but I would always look. One time I even thought maybe I'll just like take one of those online courses to do coding, because it's like coding is kind of, I can do that. I know diagnoses and I know all this stuff, and it wouldn't take that much to do coding. And maybe they kept saying the salary and the job market was there, but I started doing the coding. I did my very first part of that course and I didn't really care for it. But you know, you keep dipping your foot in and you keep trying and trying. And you, all I can say is I just kept expanding my world to look further and further out. And then also when you're doing job searches or just reading through what comes up online, don't just look at dietetic technician.
Yes.
Look at food, look at nutrition. And then when you're looking and broadening out your search terms that you're looking for, don't, by gosh, just read the title. Read what the job entails, read the job description, and then also read what the requirements are. Because finally, that's how I got to the job I'm at now. That was one of those jobs.
I was so curious how you found it. And I was going to ask, like, was DTR a part of that? So like, walk us through a little bit more of that job search and what made you apply, have the confidence to apply to the job that you're currently working at.
First of all, I knew someone who worked for New York State. And as a dietech, I was never really always pushed to look at a state job because it just, I don't know, it just didn't seem what could be there for me. I know that there are some jobs with New York State where dietitians survey facilities for the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare when they do their annual surveys. But I'm like, you have to be an RD to do that. So what could I possibly do? Now, my sister works for the state also, and she would push across job canvas postings that had been posted up. And there was this job called a food programs evaluation specialist. And it's like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, that's kind of what all I know is food.
It could be anything. So that's where I read the job description. And I said, oh, in New York State, the Department of Education administers the child nutrition programs, which are national school lunch, school breakfast, after school snack, and the summer food service program. So I said, okay, I really don't know anything about those programs, and they're pretty huge. But then I followed my own rule, read further and read what the qualifications are. And it did have almost like one of those decision trees that looked like our path. It said, you can have this and this, or you can have, you could have a 2-year degree and so much experience, or you could have a 4-year degree without your RD with this much experience, or you could have your RD. So I said, oh my goodness, with the Dietech 2-year, with all the experience I have, I really think I'm qualified for this job. But then I had to do with a big pep talk to myself.
Okay, what did that pep talk? What did that pep talk entail?
I just kept saying, I kept looking through the qualifications. Then I kept thinking, how could I take some of my long-term care experiences and projects that I did and make those situational problems that I worked through and got a favorable ending to, how could I make those possibly fit into situations that would happen while you're in a school nutrition program? So I just kept, I relied upon, the other thing I always tell people is to look broadly at jobs, but also keep a portfolio of all the experiences you've ever had throughout your career, even your job, even what you did while you were in your practicum hours. Just keep a running log. If there are things that you've accomplished that you actually have, like a physical, a report, an article, anything, materials that you use to teach a certain class that you put together, save everything in your portfolio, because when you're in your interview, you want to be able to readily remember that so you can make it fit the situation that they're asking a question about. And then you have that ready reminder and that that situation in your head to be able to answer the question that might be tossed up. Because the way they interview these days on the panel interviews, you could be asked about any situation. You just have to be able to quickly work on your feet to come up with, okay, this was a situation that kind of matches that situation. This is what I did. This was the outcome. This is how I got there. And this is why I think I would be a useful asset to your agency in this fact.
Yeah.
So I had to keep talking myself through, I really have all of these little intricate bits of knowledge and all the tools that I need for this job. I just need to take the test. And once I pass the test, they'll call me for an interview and I'll be there.
And when you say test, do you mean application
A
process?
civil service test.
Oh, a civil service test. Okay.
It's a civil service test because it is a governmental job. But once again, everything that you learn in your program, you know, the little bits and pieces and all the building blocks from everything from that 2-year degree help you be able to get through that civil service test. It's almost like taking your DTR test because it just has weird questions that sometimes you walk out and you go, did I really pass that test, do you think?
Man, yeah, they have fun with questions like that. So with the interview, now you're in the interview, how did you do the research to learn about the program?
Well, in my past, all my years, just because I did this when I would go in for interviews, our dietitians taught us in our 2-year program, always research the company or the entity that you're going for an interview for, so you have an idea of what's going on there. And this was more important than ever because I knew about nursing homes. I know what they do in nursing homes. I just need to know a little bit about the specific nursing home itself. But here I'm looking at child nutrition programs. So literally, I just Googled child nutrition programs and learned a little bit about what the whole point of child nutrition. We all had lunch at school, but we don't understand why that program was put together and what the program was meant to do and how it's administered. So I read literally New York State, since each state administers the program for this federal program. I just Googled and up came New York State's child nutrition program website. So I read like the beginning little blurbs about it. And I went in and I said, well, a kitchen is a kitchen, and nutrition things and things that happen when you're helping people with nutrition programs and with anything with nutrition, the questions somehow have to line up. And I just kept telling myself that, not really knowing if it was true or not.
Just pepping yourself up for that interview.
I was just like, yes. And they did, and it did take about a year. It took about a year for the whole test, and it's bureaucratic, as you can imagine. But I'm working at this nursing home at the point that I got the phone call, and I'm like, I'm going to make myself be happy doing this for the rest of my life until I retire and whatever. And then the phone call came and I went, oh my God, I'm going to go on this interview. And when I went through the interview, the questions that they asked, sure enough, I could find a situation that would match up. Like if you, I'm sure I can't even at this point, because, you know, you walk out and when you think that everything felt good, you're kind of euphoric and you forget the exact questions. I wish I could remember the questions they asked me so I could give examples. But all I can say is if you keep your whole portfolio of your experiences in your head and you have different situational thoughts in there, you'll be able to make something match up to one of the questions they ask. And it might not, I keep saying to people, because I know a lot of techs in long-term care or have worked in hospitals that say, I don't know anything about child nutrition. How can I do that? It's like, take the tools that are in your head, take the situations that you've lived through, because you're always going to be able to match something up.
Yeah.
To be able to say, this is a similar situation, even though it's in a totally different land, like long-term care versus administering a child nutrition program, but you can still prove what you did and what the outcome was.
Yes, that's such a good way to prepare for an interview. Like, have your portfolio set up, think about the jobs, think about your experience, and just come in with the confidence that you know what you're going to, things and you have experience. And also, I just want to applaud you for in those years of should I go back to be a dietitian, you didn't just jump right back into school. I think a lot of times people just think, oh, I need to get to go to school and get this degree so I could do this. But you just kept thinking outside the box and chasing other things and finding other things. And this eventually fell into your lap and you're doing a job that a registered dietitian is also qualified for, which speaks so much to how valuable that Ndtr credential is.
I started out doing national school lunch reviews when I first started out 6 years ago, but quickly, the people who were higher up in my agency looked at myself and my coworker and thought that we had the personalities where we could train people. So we actually train the people who come in to be able to help the schools of New York administer their programs and do the reviews for the national school lunch and school breakfast programs. So we had a brand new group because through the pandemic, we are booming. Our business is booming because we're feeding the kids all the way through the pandemic. So we have to teach and we have to help all the schools across New York State get this big job done. So since we're booming, we've hired people right on through the pandemic.
Wow.
So we have our latest group of 3, what we call newbies. All of them are RDs with their master's degree. And I'm training 3 RDs with their master's degree on how to administer child nutrition programs. And since they're new and just starting, I actually make a lot more money than they do.
That is so encouraging. That is such a win for DTRs everywhere. That's amazing to be able to, and you're at that level. So, you don't need just those credentials and that the RD credentials and the master's degree. You have the experience and you have the nature, the personality to be able to do those things. So what exactly does your job entail? I know you said training and.
Well, the major part of a child, to make our job sound a little more human, I'll just call us child nutrition representatives for New York State. What we do is we make sure that all the schools in New York State are administering the child nutrition programs correctly and that they're meeting all of the regulations. So there are all of the regulations that go along with how they reach out and get all the children who are eligible for free and reduced benefit meals. Then we have to make sure, are they following the meal pattern that the USDA has set up for the child nutrition programs? Then there's a whole bunch of financial management things that we look at. And I had never looked. I looked a little bit when I was a food service director, so I knew some things about budgeting for food and for labor and stuff like that, but I learned a lot more in my new job. So, I can point food service directors down the right path. And plus we have auditors in our program that I can, when things get really deep into the financial world, we point them to our auditors, but I can do simple things with accounting because all of us in our programs took financial and food service accounting. So this is still where I dig all the way back to my 2-year degree. And I'm like, this is awesome because food safety, I learned in microbiology in my 2-year program. I remember doing food service accounting and food service management and supervision in my 2-year program. So all of these things that in long-term care kind of faded out of my mind, I'm like digging them back out and able to start reapplying them and learn even more with the job I have now. Things about procurement. So we look at procurement to make sure they're meeting the federal guidelines for procuring things correctly with federal government funds. Mm-hmm. So we look at so many things and no one day is the same when there are different tasks that food service directors have to do through the year that go along with the regulations. There's always phone calls that we answer and we talk directly and help the food service directors through their questions and walk them through getting everything completed. And then when school is in, every 3 years, every school in the state has to be reviewed. Their programs have to be reviewed. So we actually go out on site in regular times, not during pandemic times. Right now, we kind of do desk audits and we talk a lot on the phone about the systems that they're using. And we look at their meal patterns by paperwork just to see, and production records and menus and things like that. But we're just making sure that all the regulations are being met so that they're getting this grant money and meeting the terms of the grant.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 4 years when all of a sudden they thought, hey, she's good enough to do this training thing. So for the past 2 years, I'm part of the training teams. There's 3 of us on the training team for the whole of New York State. We help put together trainings for all of the food service directors out across New York State. Sometimes those are in-person trainings where you have groups come to centralized areas, or we do, obviously right now, a lot of virtual trainings. We also train business officials because the business officials in the school lunch offices have a lot of financial paperwork and regulations they have to follow. So we train them about the child nutrition program also. And that also goes to training all of our new staff that come in, because we have to train them what the program is, and we have to know all the ins and outs better than anyone, because now we have to be the ones out in the field helping all of the schools across the state and reviewing their programs also.
Wow, that sounds like a lot that you're doing, a lot of regulation, a lot of organizing. And thank you for doing that. I know the school nutrition program influences so many Americans, so many people in New York. And so you have an inside scoop. So I have to ask, I'm sure the NDTR audience is curious, how has school nutrition changed, at least in your state, with COVID, and like what things have been altered to help with the pandemic?
With COVID, the whole dining experience for kids is not what it was. So the USDA, we do have certain rules where kids have to eat in certain places. They can't take food home. They have to eat it in the school, blah, 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 on a regular year. But during COVID, the USDA did put out waivers to allow the program to expand and to be able to let kids pick up their parents. Usually parents can't pick up food for children either. The children would have to pick up one meal. You know, if it was breakfast, they'd pick up one breakfast. If it was lunch, they'd pick up one lunch. That was reimbursable. During COVID, parents could be allowed to pick up meals for children. And there were waivers also put out to allow parents to be able to pick up more than one. You know, they could pick up breakfast and lunch for like their 2 children. Or if the school, to keep contact lower because of COVID and you wanted to lower the risk of transmission, say they were only going to distribute meals 2 times a week. Parents could pick up 2 or 3 days worth of breakfast and lunch for however many kids they had in their household. So it changed drastically for us, because that was unheard of before. And then also the poor schools, we had to help. Not that we're experts on all of this and we could help them, but we could listen to their problems and try to talk them through, or hear what other schools did. How does a school that's not set up for really like restaurant to go meals, how in God's name do they pack up this food and get it out the door? How do they get that food? Some places were rural and they were trying to deliver, because not only were they delivering food, but the bus drivers were going out with kids' lessons plans, their lunches, everything all at one time, and distributing stuff. So we were taking calls like this in.
Just food safety in that must have been so hard to organize.
The food safety, you would be working with food service directors and just, talking through these like doomsday scenarios. What do we do? What do we do? And then also the government gave us this next large job to do with the PEBT cards that went out for students who could not make it to pick up food, but they still would have been eligible to get those school meals. The parents were putting that money out, which they might not have had for feeding their children, or they just didn't have the money at all to feed their children, the government came up with this way of trying to match up how many days a week a kid was not really in school on site, that they were at home. So they were not receiving a national school lunch or a national school breakfast reimbursable meal. This way of matching up the kids and then how the funding went, I don't know how they did the formula. I have no idea and I don't want to, but they came up with a formula of how much reimbursement these different families would get, and they would get it on an EBT card, which was called a PEBT card. So New York State worked, the health department and the education department kind of came together with all the information, merged their information together. In some way, magically on the other side, the PEBT benefits came out to the families. I don't know how it happens, but
it happens. That's a lot of change going through. And so now where we are now, 2021, I mean, we're still in the pandemic. Is anything going back to normal, or are you still finding new things coming up?
we started out with just a handful of waivers this year because, of course, everyone hoped to go back to um, normal operations, just like every other year. But even as soon as last week, some of those old waivers started reappearing again. So USDA every week will update us, and last week they had to issue some more waivers back out to be able to use this year. And we might not necessarily be using them right at this moment in New York State, because our numbers haven't, I mean, they've picked up, but not as bad as some other states. But the waivers are there to use to give food service program operators if they need to do meals at home again, or if it ever came to the point where parents might have to pick up meals, those waivers are going to be there and be available for the families and the schools to be able to take advantage and still benefit from getting child nutrition program assistance.
That's wow. Thank you for sharing all of that with what you're doing with school nutrition and the area that you're working in. Also, I wanted to ask, since you are in this nice world of school nutrition, what is your perspective, or what have you seen with diversity with the nutrition professionals that you're training and working with in your little niche of nutrition?
Funny thing you should ask that. We had a little bit of a diversity mandatory training today.
Oh.
And they gave us some statistics across the United States, and then it broke it down to New York State and then down to our department, the state education department. We are still pretty white compared to the United States as it would have it. And no one can really figure out why, because New York State really has a lot of policies that make things be inclusive.
Yes.
And it just was really odd to look at the numbers.
That's strange. Maybe people aren't going into school nutrition as much.
Or not going towards the state, which I don't know why they would not, because there are so many policies that we have to follow. And then that also goes along with the diversity of how people identify. But then sometimes I think the statistics don't come out well on that, because some people are still afraid to really put down how they identify for a poll like that. So it was kind of sad when I looked at that, but I know New York State is working really hard, as given just like that mandatory training that we had to go through.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who's listening about maybe being interested in working at a state level in the field of dietetics?
Always look at the civil service posts at your state level. I don't know if it's called civil service in every state, but whatever the website is that you have for your state, look at the job, not only just the job descriptions, but please look at the descriptions of what that job entails, and then look at the qualifications. If I did not do that, I would not have this job. And literally, I couldn't even be happier at this point in my life to have this job. And I feel like it was a blessing.
That's amazing to find fulfillment in the work you're doing and to be, at a high level position. This is so encouraging, so encouraging. So thank you for what you've done. And I wanted to ask, you've been in DTR since 1988, right? That's what
Yes.
you were saying.
Well, I haven't been a DTR since 1988. I've been a dietech.
That tech.
Honestly, I didn't become a DTR until after 2000.
Okay, well, you still have a couple years under your belt. And so I wanted to ask, how are you keeping up with the continual education required for this credential?
I have just gone out on my own to search for educational opportunities or some of the wonderful dietitians that have mentored me. They'll point me in a direction. Now with child nutrition, it's a little more easy because there are a lot of things that come to us from different associations, and there will be an RD on the panel who has put it together. I'm trying to think. I just feel like a lot of it comes right to me just because of I network a lot as per my whole background. I've always networked a lot and kept in touch with people.
I love it. No, that's great. So networking and reaching out. And if it's an easy way to get those credentials, I know sometimes it could be like, oh, how am I going to get these education? But it sounds like if you're networking, communicating and reaching out and
the job that I have right now does not ask for a specific credential. And funny enough, most of the jobs I ever did in my life did not ask for it. I just felt like during one of my downtimes that not only did I feel like I was kicking myself for not becoming an RD, I'm like, you should at least have some kind of credential to prove that. I think I was in a nursing home and some of the staff on one of the units almost made me feel like I was a dishwasher coming up from the kitchen, just gathering preferences from someone. And I'm like, I'm so much more than that. You guys just don't know. Yeah. So I said, maybe if I have a credential after my name, some people like that would get it. So I got it for myself mostly, not because any job ever required it. I think 2 jobs I ever had in my life looked for it. Other than that, they did not. But I always felt like, okay, if I have those big meanies who think they're going to push you around and think that you are not qualified and you don't have what it takes, the credential will be there to prove that for them.
Yeah, that's good. Would you say that's the main reason why the DTR credential is good to have, or have you found it beneficial in other ways in the jobs that you've carried other than just showing somebody that you have done the work required for the position?
I think for the most part, it does show people that you do have credibility. Even though they might not require it, later it comes back and it shows them that you are a credible professional. The job that I am in right now, I am out of about 60 people. I am the only person who just has a nutrition degree of 2 years. And I use that just to prove that I'm juxtaposed to these people that have bachelor's and many of them have master's degrees. So I'm not just saying just because I think it's lowly, because God knows I don't think it's lowly. I do believe, because later when I got my job, I talked to some of the people who were on my interviewing panel. And when they saw that I turned in my DTR along with the rest of my resume and everything, that gave them that extra turn of the head that, ooh, she's got a 2-year degree, but look, she's got this credential. And other people came in, and even though they might have had a 4-year degree, so there are people in my office that have a master's degree, but they didn't get their RD. So I think when you add everything together and then it's just one more block to add to that building to make the full house, I think.
Yeah, just that like icing on the cake or the cherry on the ice cream that just makes you stand out and gives people the like, oh, the second glance maybe.
Yeah, I think it's that second glance. And I also think now with that new Credly that we go through for our virtual badge.
Credentialing. Yes.
I really like that when you click onto that, it shows all the different fields that we're experts in. So I
Yes.
feel like I don't even have to advertise that so hard myself. If I make them, I'm like, you can verify my credential and you can read all about my credential right there under my badge.
And see everything that I'm allowed to do. Yeah, the digital credentials, I think it's definitely going to be a game changer for NDTR, is just having
Before
everything
you would
written
have to
out.
try to remember all of that information and tell someone. And now really, at first I kept going, this is kind of weird. This is odd. Do we really need this?
Yeah.
But then when I kept clicking on it and playing with it, I said, oh my God, this is really kind of useful. And you can really educate people about what you do quite well just by having them click on that badge.
Yes, it's very informative. Yeah. So Kathy, so many awesome things that you shared with us today. And I just want to give you just some space real quick. Is there anything else you want to share or leave with the NDTR audience?
I really just want to stress that if there are 2-year programs out there and you're caught for time and think I can only have about 2 years of my life to devote to something before I need to start working, don't ever put the 2-year programs down. They are intense and they are difficult, and they put you through everything that you need to know to get out there in the field. You just need to be able to apply yourself and go above and beyond. And as I said before, just every experience that someone wants to give you and share with you, just drink it in and take it all.
I love that. And sorry, before you go, I have to ask one more question. What resources or networking tools have been vital in your career experience?
First thing I did was start out with all the RDs that I worked with in my program. And then from there, I just kept networking through all the people I came in touch with throughout my career. And still to this day, as many people that are still here, because God rest them, some of them aren't with us anymore because they were older. I've kept in touch with dietitians from way back when I was beginning. It really is invaluable to keep in touch with everybody and just keep networking out there and meeting everyone. And I even meet people online. Like, I've never met Marie, and I do a lot of work. I feel like I know you now. And I do a lot of work with Dietech Central with Corinne Cantor. For years, I have been working with her and trying to encourage dietechs and what the credential can do for you with Corinne. And I've never met her in person either, but I feel like I know her. So the virtual platform, even though it seems new during pandemic time, I feel like I've met people across the country and been able to meet people virtually. So, go online and find those specialty dietech platforms. Definitely go to Dietech Central, and you can meet me, you can meet other dietechs that can, tell you what kind of things they went through. That's all I can say.
That's so many awesome things. Yeah. I love that virtual. I've met so many people. Yeah, meeting you, Kathy, now knowing you and having you in my network is it's so cool what you could do with the virtual world. Because now I'm in Missouri, you're all the way in New York now, so we're far apart, but we were able to have this great conversation, connect, and I hope to keep you in my bubble, keep you in my connections. And thank you again so much for your time. I hope you guys took a lot out of this interview, learning about networking and then just thinking outside the box, not running straight to school, but really taking your time to try new things as a DTR, and then that job search, not just looking for the DTR, but being inventive and creative with that and looking just for all different types of things and thinking outside the box. And yeah, I'm just so blown away by this interview. I really appreciate your listening ears. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below and hopefully we'll be able to answer them for you, and we'll see you in another spotlight. Thank you so much for watching or listening.